Skinwalker, Yandalushi, Fleshgate, Shapeshifter. They have many names, depending on the region or the tribe they originate from. No matter the name, the terror they instill is universal. Here are 8 stories of people who share their first-hand experience with them. Part 1 is here, and Part 2 will be over on Mr. Saberine's channel, so make sure you go check it out. The link will be in the description box as well as on the end screen. Enjoy. I'm not being followed by anything other than my memories of that moment. That moment that felt like an eternity to me was certainly only a few seconds, but they were the most haunting seconds of my life. For a bit of context, I'm a Canadian university student, currently living in central Quebec. Not like Montreal or anything, but in a very small town bordering a very small city in the middle of nowhere. The landscapes are emerald green, with titanic mountains jutting out aggressively, all of which are blanketed by dense forests. I love my town. Everything's within walking distance. Friends, the bar, the lake, it's all great and nearby. So we often hit the town together. No need to drive anywhere or anything. Last night, we decided to have a little bonfire on this little ridge off of the side of the lake, which really doesn't provide too much surface area for a bonfire. For this reason, the 10 of us were huddled around a dimly lit campfire instead. Guitars being played, fine alcohols being drank, and good times being had by all. As the night draws on, I've charged myself with keeping the bulk of the fire going. Up until this point, all was normal, other than my close friend acting a little off. After our first few, he had run out and left by himself to get more. The ridge was out of sight of the road due to the dense forest path that we used to come and go. So he goes and cuts through it alone. When he gets back, he's acting like he's had hundreds of beers. Looked like he wasn't used to his legs. Strangely enough, he had a full case of beer with him, so I assumed he hadn't drank any more. He also wasn't gone for very long at all. Honestly, we drink together often, me and him. I know what he's like drunk, and this was particularly unusual. He's trying to talk to people, but he just can't say real words. It was as if he was trying to pre-form all of the accents of normal English speech, but didn't actually understand any words or syntax. As I mentioned before, the fire wasn't proving much in terms of light, so when we'd head off to grab some firewood, I'd usually jerry-rig my cell phone flashlight in my belt to keep the area in front of me well lit, as to not fall for fear of losing teeth. We did this a few times, and some of the others began to lose a little motivation to collect wood, so I took matters into my own hands for the last run of the evening. This brush was completely uncultivated, super thick, very dark. The only discernible paths were about shoulder width and obstructed by the odd fallen tree here and there. So I'm yanking at trees, trying to feel for anything dry. Even my phone light was falling behind waist-level foliage. I really didn't have too much lighting. Once I got a handful or so, I figured it'd be good enough for the last burn, so I turned around to go back. But just as I got this thought, my phone fell straight to the ground. So of course, it had to land face down, blocking the flash, preventing me from finding it right away. I didn't look for it right away. For some reason, I decided to let the darkness sink in. Never had I been in such a dark environment that I was unable to see my hand in front of my face. Even the brightest moonbeams wouldn't breach the canopy above. However, as I focused on my surroundings, I quickly realized I was referencing my frame using a subtle glow. It was yellowish, but twisted into a green color the more I concentrated. I was immediately very startled by its lack of movement, yet duly curious. I hesitantly paced inward, carelessly leaving my phone on the ground. As I approached, the glow split distinctly into two yellow-green bulbs that were locked to each other, their eyes. My vision is really bad. From a distance, my eyes will merge sources of light together. For instance, I can't see stars. This caused my curiosity to go nuts. What kind of fat-ass raccoon is trying to stalk me through the bushes? Something was hitting me, though. I was terrified. I bore a fear so intense that my stomach began to churn. My curiosity has always outweighed my fears, and this situation was no different. It watched me as I watched it. I began to know what it was. It began to know me. There was a very strange bond in that moment that chilled me to the core. I felt a connection to this thing, but its eyes were pumping fear into my body. The worst mistake I'd ever make is to follow. Nervously, I yelled loud enough to attempt to startle whatever it may have been, engaged in this chilling stare down. It was only 7 or 8 feet away. Its absolutely motionless reaction to my yelp began to chip away at my sanity. Was I staring at 2 elaborately placed lights in the middle of the woods? No, it couldn't be. They had to be eyes, and this battle cry didn't even make the fucker flinch. Because of that, part of me rationalized that it could not possibly be any animal. It's probably some kind of prank, or marker, or some type of ecology job. So I pressed toward it again, walking as if I knew for sure that this could all be logically explained. As I closed the gap, my vision began to hone in on these lights. Plainly defined ovals, resplendent with the brightest darkness I have ever felt. When they were legitimately just out of my range of clear vision, the lights, which were waist level before, rose up. They rose as eyes would on a bear standing on its hind legs, instantly reducing me to a quivering mess. Odd thing is, bears don't have antlers. I have never heard of a moose with piercing eyes that can stand on its hind legs either. As soon as it began to straighten up, I was already getting the fuck out of there. I ran. Luckily, I managed to kick my cell phone out of the dirt and hurriedly picked it up. The flashlight was still going, making it really easy to spot. Rolling through the woods, illuminating phone now in hand, I made it back to my campfire completely out of breath. Now, normally, I'd spray this story all over my friends, but I knew they'd just think I was fucking crazy or hit my head collecting wood. Also, considering I didn't have my bundle of sticks anymore, my shortness of breath was probably a little unjustified. I sat down and noticed that my friend from before was still being very strange. But it seemed like, with every passing minute, he was adapting more to the conversation and was steadily attempting to contribute more and more. Still, something was off. He was the last one to leave the campfire. Even after the other guys had pissed out, he just stayed and stared at the ashes. After most of us had gotten home, he calls me. An entire minute of silence. The whole time I'm shouting at him to tell me where he is, and that if he's too drunk to get home, I'll come and find him. Disturbingly, he just hangs up. After a cigarette and another half a beer, he calls me back again. This time, He's trying to talk, but like before, he cannot pronounce any words again. He never did touch that case of beer, by the way. It just sat next to him during the whole fire. So I tell him to stop being an idiot and to tell me where he is. He hangs up again, leaving me to figure out he's just drunk, emotional, and that maybe I was being a bit too harsh on him. Honestly, though, I was just so shaken up, and I needed to confide in somebody about what I had just seen. But he was incapacitated, and it frustrated me. After that, I went to bed because I figured he was just strangely drunk. It was insanely weird to me, but I'd had a few drinks too, so I wasn't really having any of his shit and figured I'd try to get some sleep. When I woke up this morning, I had a text from his roommate asking me why he saw him crawl out from underneath his car and drive away this morning. We haven't seen him since, and his roommate said he thought he never made it home because he didn't come in. What's wrong with my friend? I'm hoping he comes back, because if he doesn't, my friend just got his skin and car hijacked by a fleshgate or something. I am scared shitless. Update. He came back home around 8:30 p.m. last night, looking a little shaken up, but otherwise normal. He seems completely fine now.
I'll start by saying that this was most likely not a Navajo Skinwalker, and is more likely attributable to the behaviors of Fleshgate or Goatman. I've done a fair amount of reading on all three. This sub, green text, yada yada. Furthermore, this happened in northern Mississippi. A lot of Native American history here, but not much, if any, Navajo. This won't be a big time spine chiller, but it's weird and stands out in my mind. When this originally happened, I thought absolutely nothing of it. Only once I started reading some things did I connect the dots. So a couple years ago, my cousin who lives next door to me on our dead-end road turned 21. He decided to throw a party. Bonfire, beer pong, country music, yuck. You get the idea. We live in a very rural area. To the north, east, and west is mostly nothing but forest for miles. These parts have a few spooky stories, weird noises in the woods and all, but that's about all. Pretty uneventful. So, all the friends start to arrive, mostly guys and girls we went to school with, but a few people I don't know. Grilled food is consumed whilst drinking alcohol, then more alcohol, beer pong, then eventually it gets to the point that some are just doing random stupid shit like chopping down a tree. Most of the time I'm near my friend we'll call Chris, playing guitars. I am the man when it comes to the guitar, but don't get any appreciation by anyone but him, because I'm not into country. I am also the village lumberjack, and I gave my friend we'll call Steve the axe, with which he is stupidly trying to chop down a tree near the damn power lines. All kinds of shits and gigs ensue, and eventually the decision is made to head a little ways into the woods to a homemade swing. Basically a rope with bicycle handlebars on top of a hill. The part where it gets weird is coming up, so hang in there. I and a few other guys walked down the driveway, through a field, and into the woods to the swing. I stopped in the field to collect myself. I was beginning to realize that I was too drunk. I continue the walk to the swing, and when I get there, everyone is there. What the fuck? A few of us guys were in front, and the only ones going out there, I thought. I saw no one pass me. How'd they all get out here? Not the creepy part though, just my drunkenness getting the better of me. Dicking around ensues, then we all head back to the house. We were all so drunk we wouldn't notice an extra person, which I now believe there might have been based on what I found out later. More beer pong and general dicking around, then it hits me. I'm gonna throw up. This is important because this is the only time I was away from everyone. I'm behind the tool shed puking until the dry heaves hit, and they continue for a while. I have no tolerance to alcohol. I drink only 2 or 3 times a year at the absolute most, so a normal Saturday's amount of alcohol for my cousin will damn near destroy me. So I'm sitting there puking and dry heaving and petting my boxer, McMuffin. It is during this time that I am unaccounted for that the creepy shit happens. My cousin and friends swear that I came up to them acting all weird. Said while they were smoking a joint that it was handed to me. Says I took a few puffs, then just walked off into the woods acting all weird like. Not very descriptive, I know, but that's all I could get out of them. Never happened. I do not hit joints, never have and never will. It's not something I'm into. That is what makes me damn sure that it wasn't me. I was behind the shed puking and being comforted by McMuffin. After that, I ended up sitting on the porch, then in the house until the night ended. So, like I said, not a big chiller, just something weird that I thought might be something more after finding out about some of these creatures. My theory is that maybe we caught attention of something when we went into the woods. It followed us back, impersonated me when I left the crowd, acted weird, then went back into the woods. That's the kind of stuff you usually read about in Goatman accounts, so I figured there might be something to this. Damn it, this got me thinking about a couple other weird things. I went out one night to feed Muff, whose enclosure is at the edge of the yard about 40 yards from the house. It's late at night and very dark. While I'm feeding her, my mother opens the door and stands there talking to something she thinks is me. She said she repeatedly called my name, but this thing just walks away into the darkness. Then she sees me with my flashlight coming back to the house and promptly freaks out. My sister saw it another night in similar circumstance. Another time, my mother and niece saw some sort of creature in the garden behind the house. I can't really remember the description she gave other than it having human and animal-like features. I just blew it off as them imagining things. Maybe there is something in them there woods.
My father died about 5 years ago, unexpectedly, from a heart attack. To say it was hard on my mother and I is an understatement. Our old house in Knoxville just didn't feel like home anymore. About a year later, Mom and I made plans to take ourselves and our elderly dog Ace on a move further south to a small town situated about a half hour from Atlanta. Just a few days before we were slated to move, however, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've ever come to experience. All that was within my dream was my bedroom, a picture-perfect recreation of the real thing. I sometimes wonder if I was in some sort of sleep paralysis state when it occurred. To further add to the dream's realism, in the middle of the night, the street lights across the street would illuminate through my window, creating a light reflection on the wall perpendicular. In my dream, as I lay there staring at that exact reflection on the wall, I saw an orb of smoke fade in from the shadows. Goosebumps across my skin as I lay there panicked and afraid to move a muscle. Suddenly it stopped moving and steadily hung in the light's reflection as if it were staring at me. Without warning, it spoke to me in my dead father's voice. "I'm sending something to watch you." Despite hearing my father's voice come from the orb, I was terrified of it. I didn't know why. And yet, I managed to squeak out a small reply toward it. "What?" I whispered. The orb remained silent for a few moments, leaving an eerily dead silence in the voice's place. Just as quickly, it spoke to me one final time. "Damn, Black." I woke up almost instantaneously, gasping for breath. The nightmare had chilled me to my core. I didn't know exactly what to make of it, especially those two final words. I chalked it up to maybe Dad wishing us well on our move, but at the time, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was some kind of warning. Within the next couple of weeks, my mother and I moved out of Knoxville and headed down south to Georgia. She had managed to find a quaint little house for us, with only one or two neighbors down a gravel road in the middle of the woods. It was a nice fit for us. Probably the best reliever of all the stress that came with the move, however, was our neighbor's cat. She was a petite, older black cat that gravitated toward me almost instantly, and I treated her as if she were my own pet. I left out a can of food once or twice a week for her, and even if I didn't call out for her, when she saw me outside, she would always run up to me. She helped ease my tensions about leaving Knoxville behind, especially without Dad there with us. Less than a month into our new house, I awoke suddenly to a faint coughing noise that sounded like it was coming from downstairs. One important thing to know about our dog Ace is that he has a collapsed trachea. He needs medicine to help calm the condition down, so I'm used to waking up in the middle of the night to give him his medicine. I proceeded downstairs from my bedroom to give him his medicine, but I couldn't find him anywhere throughout the house. He wasn't in his bed sleeping or in the kitchen. Nowhere to be found. I didn't check Mom's bedroom, however, as to avoid waking her up. Besides, I wouldn't have heard the coughing if he had been in there anyway, so I just let it be. That's when I heard the cough again, but it was coming from further away, as if from outside. I looked over at the side patio door leading out into the woodlands and realized I had forgotten to shut it. There it stood, slightly ajar. Shit, I thought to myself. He got out. I immediately ran outside with a flashlight and started calling out for my dog. Ace! Ace! I shouted into the neighboring trees. I heard another cough and shined my light in its direction. That time, it had echoed from down the gravel road. I swear, a path had never looked so terrifyingly desolate before in my life than that night, as I stared down the same gravel road that had led us to our new home. But in that moment, I thought my dog was lost, and I chalked it up to my new house jitters, so I pressed onward. Ace! Come on, boy. Home's this way, buddy. That's when I heard it. The cough that I had been following, almost right beside me. But this time, it didn't stay like the dry cough it had been. Instead, the cough had slowly descended into a low growl. I shined my light toward the new sound. There stood a bright red fox in the middle of the path. For a moment, I figured it was some kind of sick fox I had mistaken for my dog. The whole time, as I was processing what I was seeing, it stared directly at me. Its eyes glowed from the light of my flashlight. However, our stare broke when it tilted its head to the right. I looked down, and there she was, our neighbor's little black cat, standing beside me. However, it was as if she had completely changed persona. She was no longer the happy, affectionate cat I had come to know. Instead, she had her back arched, upright, every fiber of hair standing at attention, and uttered the lowest growl I had ever heard come out of a feline. In that moment, I figured she was just scared of the fox, so I knelt down beside her in a bid to coax her away and avoid the fox hurting her. But no matter how many times I tried to coax her out of the fight mode, she wouldn't budge. Her stare remained unfazed. That's when I looked toward the direction of the fox once more. But there wasn't a fox standing there anymore. Instead, in the exact same spot of that gravel road was a walking, rotting corpse of a roadkill coyote, slowly moving toward me. I took a step back, absolutely horrified of what I was seeing. Its jaw hanging loose from its face. One of its eyes was stained with blood, and it wobbled back and forth, as if it was desperately fighting pain. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief, hoping I was imagining it. But it was still there when my eyes reopened. Despite the gruesome sight before us, our neighbor's black cat, no matter how tiny she was, stood there and kept growling at the creature. Suddenly it stopped. The creature had ceased its walk toward us. For a moment, it just stood there, glancing back and forth between myself and this little black cat that was trying to defend me. That's when I unmistakably heard this beast mutter 2 solemn words in a low, gravelly voice. "Damn black." In a flash, the creature ran straight into the woods. I shined my flashlight in its direction, but it had completely vanished. Even the brush it had ran through looked untouched. That's when the cat, still standing beside me, calmed herself down. Almost as if nothing had happened, she rubbed herself up against my leg, returning to her normal, loving mood. Despite technically not being mine, I proceeded to scoop her up and run back into the house. Before heading upstairs with the little black cat snuggled up in my arms, I decided to poke my head into my mother's room. Laying on the floor, sound asleep, was Ace. He had been there the entire time. I quietly closed her door before bolting upstairs. I made sure that little cat slept with me in my bed that night. From the research I've done, I think I was almost the victim of some kind of skinwalker. It must have picked up the sounds my dog sometimes makes late at night, knowing I'd likely come to his aid. For whatever reason, our neighbor's black cat had scared it so badly it scrambled away. I haven't seen it since that night, maybe because that same cat still likes to wander down the gravel road late at night, or maybe that thing just decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Either way, whether I have my father or pure luck to thank, I leave a can of food out every single night for that little black cat. The most ironic part of it all, the cat's name is Halloween.
About 6 years ago, I was at my friend's parents' house up in Cave Creek, which is a town on the far north end of Phoenix. There are some pretty nice houses up there, but also a lot of areas that are totally undeveloped. So you get wide swaths of empty desert between neighborhoods, lots of wildlife, etc. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and me and 3 other friends were sitting on the back patio smoking cigarettes and shooting the shit. At one point there was a lull in our conversation, and suddenly we heard the sound of a baby crying coming from the house to our left. We kind of chuckled about it for a second because it was so unexpected. The night was otherwise silent. The baby cried for a few seconds more, and then the sound just moved. When the crying first started, it sounded like it was probably 300 feet to our left, give or take. My best guess is that it then moved at about 30 miles per hour, almost straight out into the desert for around 10 seconds. Then it stopped. It didn't slowly fade, it just cut off sharply, and then the night was silent again. We were all dead quiet for a minute or two, everyone looking from one to the other in disbelief, unsure that the others had heard the same thing or that it had actually happened. But we all heard it the same way. It wasn't some animal that sounded like a baby, it was the sound of an actual human baby crying. I should add that I generally don't believe in the supernatural realm. I'm usually the first person to rationally explain away spooky shit, but this is one of the few logically inexplainable things I have ever experienced. The only animals that can move that fast that live in the area are mountain lions, and they're extremely rare. The crying never changed or intensified, as I have imagined it would if a mountain lion was carrying off a baby. None of us knew about skinwalkers at the time, but I later learned that they are believed to mimic the sounds of crying infants to lure people into their traps. What do you guys think?
You know, I forgot to mention one other universal thing about these creatures, and that is that you are not supposed to talk about them, for when you do, they take notice of you. Make sure you check out part 2 on Mr. Saberine's channel. See you next time.